Middle-earth is a place of great variety, changeful landscapes, various species of animals and plants, and differing races all contribute to the beauty of Arda. Among these aspects of a world of variety, perhaps the deepest well to fathom is the many races that inhabit Arda. From Dwarves to Elves to Men, each race has its own strengths and weaknesses, its own beauties and sorrows, and its own gifts from Eru himself. Today we will be looking at the gifts which Eru Illuvatar has given to the Elves and the Edain, in particular, the gift of their natures and the way that those natures contribute to their life upon Arda and the future afterwards. In other words, we shall tackle the subject which plagued many with doubt and anguish, and which even the wise, Finrod and Andreth, struggle to understand: mortality, immortality, and how elves and men fall into that spectrum. Among the hidden gems of Arda's lore is the story of the deep conversation of Finrod and Andreth, a wise woman of the Edain, on the subject of the nature of elves and men and their mortality, or supposed lack thereof. Andreth, following the teachings, law, and beliefs of her people, claims vehemently that men were not always mortal, but became so under the hand of Morgoth. Finrod makes an attempt to convince her of the invalidity of this argument, showing that if this were true, it would mean that Morgoth was more powerful than even Eru himself, since he would have been able to change the very nature of what Eru had made. In addition, it would not make sense when one considered the restlessness of men and their desire for something beyond the earth on which they presently lived. Andreth continues her insistence that the present nature of men is a curse, something which they have been unfairly subjected to, and that the fate of the elves is enviable compared to the future presence of the Edain. She claims that men were made for life eternal just as the elves were, and as should be seen, she was both right and wrong. Finrod's response again makes an attempt to show Andreth how the fate of men is in accord with the nature. They are not bound to the earth, but leave it and proceed to another life beyond that fulfills their deepest desires. The elves, in comparison, are bound to the earth and cannot leave it until it ceases to exist. When this happens, Finrod says, he does not know where the elves will go or what their fate will be, and thus they are not given the hope of men, but are left to live in faith. Finrod thus implies that the fate of men is to be envied by the elves, rather than the other way around. It is important to understand that Arda does not just consist of Middle-earth itself, but of Valinor, the Lonely Isle, and all the creations of Eru that are bounded by time. Indeed, this is how Finrod and the analyses that have been written on this conversation have described the difference between the fate and nature of elves and men. Elves are bound to the rule of time, while men are not. Of course, it is not so simple a distinction as that, but it is important to note that elves are not immortal in the sense in which many think. Indeed, they are not immortal at all, but are instead subject to a long life that is bound to Arda, and that will end when Arda does. Finrod and Andreth continue to discuss these deep matters, diving into the battle of death itself, and how it separates the fair spirit from the whole body. While this subject is beyond the scope of this discussion, it is enough to say that Finrod and Andreth come to the conclusion that the death of men was not meant to be a separation of fair and horror, but that this was an evil brought about by the workings of Morgoth, particularly through his inducement of men to fear death. It seems that men were meant to leave this life still united in body and soul, while the elves, when Arda does end, will either cease to exist altogether, or, as Finrod believes, meet another fate unknown to him, but which he trusts will be for their good. Finrod and Andreth then proceed to discuss the place of men in the future of Arda remade. They realize that men are meant to have a great part in this healing, and are to be the instruments of the reuniting of elves and men at the end of time. However, Andreth questions how they can still accomplish this mission, now that their natural passage from this life has been disrupted by Morgoth. They come to the conclusion that only Eru himself can heal this hurt, and that to do so, he must associate himself with men so extremely that it seems he must become one of them. Somehow they believe this mission will be accomplished, and not only will Arda be remade, but it will be made so gloriously that the elves and men will be reunited, and each will find fulfillment and joy in the life eternal for which they were made. At this point, the discussion becomes more of a friend-to-friend encouragement than a discussion of law, but it is interesting to note how Andreth declares that she and her people are left with nothing but Amdir, a blind faith, while Finrod insists that they are rather gifted a stell, the hope that is trust in one who is worth trusting. It is on this note that the two part, and it is here that I must leave you as well. While today's discussion has only been a precursory skimming of a topic so deep that it confounded even the wise, it is enough to know that while the fate of elves and men may not be completely understood, while Gillistow shines, there is still